My daughter threw me out of her wedding like I was an embarrassment she needed hidden before the photos started. 1 hour later, her husband called asking for the deed to my ranch. That was the moment I realized they never wanted me there. They wanted what I owned. But while they were busy planning my future, they forgot one thing. The land was never going to belong to them. Because before my husband died, he left me a way to destroy everything they were building. And what happened next, no one saw coming. The pen felt heavier than it should in my hand. Not because of the metal. Because of what it would erase. Rain crawled down the tall glass windows of the attorney's office in slow silver lines, blurring the Austin skyline into something cold and distant. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee gone lukewarm. Across from me, Daniel Brooks adjusted the stack of legal papers waiting on the desk between us. Every page carried the same promise: once signed, nothing could be undone. My phone buzzed again against the leather chair. Madison. 43 missed calls. The screen lit up so many times that morning it no longer startled me. It only tightened something inside my chest. I stared at her name until the vibration stopped, then placed the phone face down again. Daniel watched me carefully. "You're certain about this?" I looked at the final document. At the blank line waiting for my signature. At the pen trembling slightly between my fingers. 3 weeks earlier, I still believed my daughter was just overwhelmed by wedding stress. I told myself exhaustion explained the coldness in her voice. I told myself distance didn't mean cruelty. I was wrong. Another buzz. This time, I picked up the phone. Daniel leaned back quietly while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the rain-soaked windows. I pressed call. It rang once. Then twice. "Mom?" Madison answered immediately, breathless. "Thank God. Where are you? Why aren't you answering me?" I closed my eyes for a second. Her voice sounded frightened now. Desperate. Nothing like the voice that told me to leave her wedding. "Madison," I said softly. "Listen carefully. I'm only going to say this once." Silence hit the line. Outside, rain tapped harder against the glass. I looked down at the signed papers in front of me and finally said the 4 words that destroyed everything they had planned. "It's gone forever." And before I tell you what happened after that call, you need to understand something. If your own family has ever made you feel unwanted, invisible, like your love only mattered when it was useful, stay with me until the end of this story. Because sometimes the people who sacrifice the most are the ones betrayed the hardest. 3 weeks earlier, I left the ranch before sunrise with a garment bag hanging in the back seat and a speech repeating itself in my head like a prayer I was afraid to forget. The highway to Austin stretched empty beneath pale orange light. Dust lifted behind my truck every time the wind crossed the road. One hand stayed on the steering wheel. The other kept touching the envelope resting beside me. $8,000. Cash. Nearly 7 months of overtime shifts and sleepless mornings. I wanted Madison to start her marriage without debt. Harold would have wanted that too. The thought of my husband tightened something inside me. His old leather gloves still sat in the truck's center console. I had never moved them. Sometimes I caught the scent of cedar and motor oil and could almost believe he was still there beside me, elbow resting near the window, smiling at my nervous rambling. "You're overthinking it, Eve," he used to say. "She's your daughter. Just speak from the heart." So I practiced anyway. I rehearsed every sentence while the Texas sunrise spread slowly across the fields. How proud I was. How beautiful she looked even as a little girl running through the pasture with scraped knees and tangled hair. How much her father would have loved seeing her in white. By the time Austin appeared in the distance, my palms were damp against the steering wheel. A strange question kept circling inside my head. Can a mother become a stranger inside her own child's life without realizing when it started? I pushed the thought away the second my phone buzzed. Madison. We're running a little behind, she said quickly. Music and voices filled the background behind her. Just come straight to the venue, okay? Of course, sweetheart. And Mom? A pause. Short. Tight. Try not to stress today. Vivian wants everything very organized. Vivian Mercer. Brandon's mother. Even hearing her name shifted the air. I won't cause problems, I said carefully. Madison gave a distracted hum. Okay, good. See you soon. The call ended before I could say I loved her. The wedding venue sat high above the hills outside Austin, wrapped in white stone arches and expensive landscaping so perfect it barely looked real. Valets hurried between luxury cars. Women in silk dresses crossed the courtyard balancing champagne glasses between manicured fingers. Crystal lights hung from the reception ceiling like frozen rain. Everything gleamed. Everything except me. I parked my dusty truck beside a row of black SUVs that cost more than my ranch tractor. For a moment, I stayed seated with both hands gripping the wheel. Then I looked at Harold's gloves one last time. Help me get through today, I whispered. Inside, the difference between our worlds became impossible to ignore. The Mercer family moved through the venue like royalty greeting subjects. Vivian stood near the entrance wrapped in pale gold designer fabric, diamonds flashing beneath the chandeliers every time she lifted her hand. People gravitated toward her naturally. Laughing. Nodding. Trying to impress her. When she finally noticed me, her smile appeared half a second too late. Evelyn, she said politely. You made it. I wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding. Of course. Her eyes flicked briefly toward my dress. Not cruel. Worse. Measured. One of the coordinators approached before the silence could settle. Family photo in 5 minutes, the young woman announced brightly. I stepped forward instinctively. Vivian touched my elbow lightly. Actually, we're doing Brandon's side first. Maybe wait near the reception hall for now? Near the reception hall. Not with the family. I nodded anyway. Throughout the afternoon, small moments kept cutting deeper than they should have. A bridesmaid handed champagne to everyone around me and skipped my place entirely before realizing it too late. Oh, she laughed awkwardly. Sorry. During photos, the photographer repositioned me twice until I ended up near the edge. Can we move Mom slightly back? Not Evelyn. Not Mrs. Carter. Mom. But said like a production issue needing adjustment. Madison barely looked at me the entire time. Every conversation between us felt interrupted before it could breathe. You look beautiful, I told her softly once while the makeup artist fixed her veil. Thanks, Mom. That lace reminds me of your grandmother's dress. Hold on, she cut in immediately, turning toward Vivian. Do we still have the updated seating chart? I stood there another few seconds before quietly stepping aside. No one noticed. By evening, the ballroom glowed gold beneath the crystal lights. White roses covered every table. Guests laughed loudly over violin music while servers carried trays of imported champagne through the crowd. And somehow, in a room filled with hundreds of people, I had never felt more alone in my life. I kept telling myself it would get better once the ceremony started. Weddings were chaotic, emotional, busy. That was the explanation I clung to every time Madison drifted past me without stopping. Every time someone else reached her first. A bridesmaid fixing her veil. Vivian adjusting the seating chart. Brandon whispering something into her ear that made her laugh while I stood only a few feet away holding a wrapped wedding gift against my chest like a forgotten package. I tried again during cocktail hour. Madison, I called gently as she moved through the crowd. She slowed, but only barely. Mom, not right now, okay? We're already behind schedule. I just wanted 1 minute. I know. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder toward the photographer. Maybe later. Maybe later. The first time she said it, it sounded reasonable. By the 5th time, it started sounding like a door quietly closing. I wandered toward the edge of the ballroom while guests filled the center with noise and movement. Crystal lights shimmered overhead. Servers passed silver trays through the crowd. Somewhere near the dance floor, people were already laughing loud enough to drown out the violin quartet. And somehow, the fuller the room became, the more invisible I felt inside it. There are places so crowded that a person can feel themselves disappearing in real time. That night, I understood that feeling completely. I stood near the champagne table watching strangers hug my daughter while I waited for a moment that never arrived. No introduction. No, this is my mother. Just polite smiles from people whose eyes slid past me seconds later. At one point, an older man beside me asked, "Are you with the catering company?" I smiled before I could stop myself. "No," I answered quietly. "I'm the bride's mother." The embarrassment on his face lasted 3 seconds. Mine stayed much longer. A question began circling inside my mind no matter how hard I tried to push it away. When did Madison start being ashamed of me? Not of my clothes. Not of my truck. Of me. The answer came sooner than I expected. The reception music had just started getting louder when I finally saw Madison walking directly toward me. Relief hit me first. Fast. Foolish. Then I noticed how tight her expression looked. "Mom," she said softly. "Can we talk for a second?" She led me away from the ballroom toward a narrow hallway near the outdoor terrace. The music faded behind us, but the bass still vibrated faintly through the walls. Cold evening wind slipped through the open doors nearby, lifting the edge of her veil. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "Are you okay?" Madison crossed her arms tightly. For a moment, she wouldn't look at me. Then finally, "You need to leave." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Her jaw tightened. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." The words didn't make sense at first. My brain kept trying to rearrange them into something less cruel. "I don't understand." She exhaled sharply and glanced back toward the ballroom like she was worried someone might see us talking. "People are uncomfortable." People. Not her. People. I stared at her face searching for hesitation. Regret. Anything. Instead, she kept talking in that low, tense voice people use when they want a problem removed quietly. "You've been standing too close during photos." Vivian noticed. Brandon's family noticed. And honestly, she swallowed. "The dress is too casual for this kind of event." My fingers tightened around the envelope inside my purse. $8,000. Every extra shift. Every exhausted morning. Still not enough to belong in the room where my daughter was getting married. Madison rubbed her forehead impatiently. I just need tonight to be perfect, okay? Perfect. The word sliced deeper than yelling would have. Because she wasn't angry. She was embarrassed. And somehow that hurt more. My daughter didn't say, "You're making me uncomfortable." She said, "You're making other people uncomfortable." Like I was something that needed to be hidden before the important guests noticed. Behind her, laughter exploded from the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Music swelled louder. Life kept moving only a few feet away while mine stood completely still. My lips trembled once before I forced them steady. "All right," I whispered. Madison looked relieved immediately. Relieved. That was the part one would remember later more than anything else. Not the words. Not the hallway. Not even the humiliation. The relief on her face when I agreed to disappear. I nodded once because I could feel the room spinning if I stayed there any longer. Madison stepped back immediately, already glancing toward the ballroom again. Toward the life waiting for her on the other side of those doors. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I love you." Just relief wrapped in politeness. For one strange second, I almost reached for her hand anyway. Reflex. Habit. 28 years of motherhood refusing to die gracefully inside me. But she had already turned away. The music swallowed her the moment she disappeared back into the ballroom. I stood alone in the hallway listening to the muffled laughter behind the walls while cold air drifted through the open terrace doors. My fingers tightened around the purse hanging from my shoulder until the edges of the envelope inside pressed sharply against my palm. $8,000. I slowly pulled the envelope out and stared at it. All those extra shifts. All those nights eating leftovers because I was trying to save enough to help her start a better life. And somehow, none of it mattered as much as the embarrassment of having me seen too close to the family photos. A server passed by carrying champagne glasses and briefly smiled at me before hurrying on. He didn't know the bride had just removed her own mother from the wedding like an unwanted guest. No one knew. Or maybe worse, no one cared. I walked through the reception hall one final time. Past the glowing tables. Past the white roses. Past people dancing beneath crystal lights while the band played loud enough to shake the floor beneath my heels. Nobody stopped me. Not one person asked if I was okay. Near the center of the ballroom, Madison spun into Brandon's arms laughing at something he whispered into her ear. Vivian stood nearby greeting guests with perfect posture and practiced elegance. Beautiful. Controlled. Untouched by what had just happened. I paused near the glass entrance doors and looked back one last time. That was when the truth hit hardest. The most painful part isn't when people hurt you. It's when they continue smiling afterward as if you never existed at all. Outside, the Texas night felt colder than before. Wind swept across the parking lot tugging at my dress while distant music still echoed faintly behind the closed doors. I climbed into my truck with trembling hands and sat there staring through the windshield for almost a full minute before turning the key. Then I drove away from my daughter's wedding completely alone. And the next morning, Madison called me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison's face in that hallway. Calm. Controlled. Relieved. By sunrise, my chest felt hollow. I carried my coffee outside anyway, more out of habit than desire, and walked toward the garden behind the ranch house. The morning air smelled of damp soil and cedar. Sunlight spread slowly across the pasture, warming the fence posts Harold built with his own hands 20 years earlier. Usually the land calmed me. That morning, nothing did. I knelt beside the tomato beds pulling weeds one by one, trying to quiet my thoughts through repetition. Dirt gathered beneath my fingernails. Birds moved through the oak trees overhead. Somewhere far off, cattle shifted near the north fence line. Then my phone buzzed in my back pocket. Madison. My heartbeat stumbled. For one foolish second, hope rushed in so fast it almost hurt. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe Brandon or Vivian had finally seen how cruel it was. Maybe she woke up ashamed of herself. I answered immediately. Mom, hi. Her voice sounded bright. Casual. Quick question. The hope vanished before she even finished the second word. Yes? Do you know where the ranch deed paperwork is? I stayed completely still. The wind moved softly through the grass around me while my mind struggled to catch up. The paperwork? Yeah. Papers shuffled on her end of the line. Brandon and I were talking this morning, and honestly, your property would be perfect for development. Development. Not home. Not family land. Development. I slowly stood up from the garden bed. Madison kept talking, energized now. Brandon's uncle knows investors in luxury hospitality. They're looking for land outside Austin for high-end retreat cabins. Spa stuff. Nature experiences. Rich people love that now. I stared across the pasture at Harold's old barn glowing gold beneath the morning sun. My husband painted that barn himself the summer before Madison started kindergarten. We could make an incredible profit, Mom, she continued. Like, life-changing money. Life-changing for who? I swallowed carefully. Madison, this land has been in Harold's family for generations. I know, but that's exactly why it's valuable. The sentence landed harder than she realized. Or maybe she realized it perfectly. She lowered her voice slightly, switching tones the way people do when they believe they're being reasonable. And honestly, you're not getting younger. There it was. The real conversation. Not about opportunity. Not about helping me. About replacing me. I walked slowly toward the porch, gripping the phone tighter with every step. What exactly are you suggesting? Oh, don't sound upset, she replied quickly. We already looked at a retirement community near Austin. It's beautiful, Mom. Private cottages, pool, medical staff, walking trails, a retirement community? You'd love it there. I stopped walking. I'm 61. And managing all this land alone is unrealistic, she interrupted gently. Too gently. You can't keep doing ranch work forever. Forever. The word echoed strangely inside me because I suddenly understood something terrifying. This conversation had been planned long before the wedding. The humiliation. The distance. The coldness. None of it was random. They were already imagining a future without me standing on this land. Greed rarely arrives looking like a monster. Most of the time, it dresses politely and calls itself a better plan for your future. Brandon's uncle said timing matters, Madison continued. If we move quickly, we could lock investors in before summer. We. Not you. We. as though my ranch had already become community property inside her mind. A question rose slowly inside me, heavy and poisonous. Was my daughter trying to help me, or remove me? Mom? Madison's tone sharpened slightly when I didn't answer fast enough. Are you still there? I looked across the fields Harold loved more than any place on earth. Then I quietly asked the question I already feared I knew the answer to. When were you planning to tell me you'd decided where I was supposed to live? There was a pause on the line after I asked the question. Not guilt. Calculation. Then Madison gave a small laugh like I was overreacting. Mom, nobody is deciding your life for you. A retirement community says otherwise. Oh, come on. Her tone tightened. You're acting like we're throwing you away somewhere. The words settled heavily between us because that was exactly what it felt like. I walked slowly onto the porch while she continued explaining the place in exhausting detail. Private cottages. Meal service. Weekly activities. Medical supervision. She sounded less like a daughter talking about her mother and more like someone comparing long-term housing options online. Then Brandon's voice appeared suddenly in the background. Tell her about the golf course, he said casually. Madison laughed softly. Brandon says there's even a golf course nearby. I stared out across the ranch in disbelief. Harold's windmill turned slowly in the distance. The horses grazed near the south pasture. Morning sunlight spilled across the land my family buried memories inside for decades. And these people were discussing where to relocate me like I was furniture creating spacing issues. Mom, Brandon suddenly said louder, clearly taking the phone now. You'd honestly have a much easier life there. His voice carried that smooth sales tone wealthy men use when they believe resistance is temporary. We already researched property values around your acreage. If we package enough land together, the investors could move fast. Package enough land together. Not preserve. Not protect. Package. Every sentence stripped another layer of humanity away from the place Harold loved. For me too. You should think long-term, Brandon continued. This isn't emotional. It's practical. Practical. I almost laughed. Because the man standing in a luxury condo downtown was explaining practicality to the woman who spent 30 years repairing fences in Texas heat beside her dying husband. They never asked how I wanted to live. They only discussed where I should be placed. Brandon, I said carefully, this ranch is not for sale. A brief silence followed. Then Madison spoke again, but something in her voice had changed. Sharper now. This is my future too, Mom. The sentence hit harder than yelling would have. Your future. Built from what? My husband's land? My labor? My sacrifice? I leaned against the porch railing, suddenly exhausted. When your father died, I said quietly, I stayed awake 3 nights straight trying to figure out how to keep this property from collapsing financially. Madison sighed impatiently. And I appreciate that, but things are different now. Different. That word again. Like love had expiration dates. Like loyalty adjusted according to opportunity. There are investors involved already, Brandon added carefully. People are expecting movement soon. I frowned immediately. Investors? Madison answered too quickly. We mentioned the property to a few people, that's all. Without asking me. Without owning a single acre of it. A cold feeling moved slowly through my chest. Children raised on sacrifice sometimes grow up believing sacrifice is their permanent inheritance. Listen, Brandon said, still using that calm business voice. Nobody's trying to pressure you. We just need the paperwork to explore options. Need. Not ask. Need. I looked out toward the north fence line where the grass bent softly under the wind. Then I said the first real no of the conversation. No. Silence crashed into the call. Madison inhaled sharply. Mom, don't do this. But something inside me had already started changing. And later that afternoon, I found the fence cut open. The moment I ended the call, the silence around the ranch felt unnatural. Heavy. Like the land itself was listening. Clouds gathered slowly over the pasture during the afternoon, darkening the sky hour by hour until the sunlight disappeared completely behind thick layers of gray. Wind rattled the kitchen windows while I stood at the sink staring at my phone face down on the counter. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then the messages started. Madison first. Mom, please stop being emotional. A minute later, you're overreacting. Then Brandon. We need to handle this professionally. Professionally. As if they were discussing a delayed business contract instead of trying to push a widow off the land where she buried her husband. The phone buzzed again. And again. Unread texts stacked across the screen faster than I could process them. If you refuse cooperation, legal options may become necessary. Investors are already involved. Do not create unnecessary complications. Complications. That was what my existence had become to them. Not mother. Not family. An obstacle delaying paperwork. Thunder rolled somewhere far across the fields. The kitchen darkened as storm clouds swallowed the last traces of daylight outside. I stood there barefoot against the cold floor tiles reading message after message while anger slowly replaced shock inside my chest. Then one text stopped me completely. Madison had sent a screenshot from a group conversation by accident. I wasn't supposed to see it. She's getting older and harder to manage, Madison wrote. Manage. Like I was a difficult situation instead of a human being. Below that, one of Brandon's relatives replied, she honestly sounds emotionally unstable. Another message followed seconds later. You should secure the property before she changes paperwork. I stared at the screen so long the words began blurring together. Emotionally unstable. Hard to manage. Not grieving. Not hurt. Not humiliated after being thrown out of her daughter's wedding less than 24 hours earlier. Just inconvenient. Something inside me shifted then. Not sadness anymore. Not even heartbreak. Humiliation sharp enough to turn into rage. Because they weren't only trying to take my land. They were slowly stripping away my dignity first. Outside, thunder cracked louder above the ranch. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. By late afternoon, the storm clouds had swallowed almost all the light above the ranch. The air felt wrong. Too still 1 second. Too restless the next. I tried distracting myself with chores. Fed the horses. Checked the water lines. Walked the northern edge of the property the way Harold used to whenever something weighed heavily on his mind. That was when I saw the fence. At first, I thought the wind had knocked part of it loose. The storm had been building for hours, and old wire snaps sometimes under pressure. But as I stepped closer, my stomach tightened instantly. This wasn't storm damage. The wire had been cut clean through. I crouched slowly beside the opening, fingers brushing the sharp metal edges. Fresh mud surrounded the broken section. Deep boot prints pressed into the ground nearby, still dark from the afternoon moisture. Too large to be mine. Too recent to ignore. Wind swept hard across the pasture, bending the grass flat around my legs while a strange pressure built inside my chest. Someone had been on my land. Not passing through. Watching. I straightened quickly and scanned the far edge of the property. That was when I noticed the truck. Dark pickup. Parked beyond the fence line near the gravel road. Engine running. The windows were tinted too heavily to see inside, but I felt it immediately, that awful instinct women learn to trust long before they can explain it. Whoever sat in that truck knew I had seen the fence. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the pickup slowly reversed, turned around, and disappeared down the road without headlights. My heartbeat wouldn't settle afterward. I repaired the wire with shaking hands while dusk settled over the ranch in heavy gray layers. Every gust of wind made me glance over my shoulder. Every distant sound tightened the muscles across my back. One question kept circling louder and louder inside my head. Who was standing on my land, and why did they believe they had the right? By nightfall, the storm finally broke. Rain slammed against the ranch house windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Thunder rolled across the fields like something enormous dragging itself through the dark. The electricity flickered twice while I sat alone in Harold's chair pretending to read a book I hadn't actually looked at in nearly 20 minutes. The house felt too large without him that night. Too empty. Another flash of lightning lit the pasture outside. And for half a second, I saw someone near the barn. A silhouette. Tall. Motionless. My breath caught instantly. I stood so fast the chair legs scraped violently across the wooden floor. The next lightning strike came 3 seconds later. Nothing there. Just rain. Just darkness. Still, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Fear does strange things when it enters a quiet house. It makes old wood creak louder. Makes shadows linger longer. Makes every locked door suddenly feel temporary. I checked every window twice before pulling the curtains closed. Then I walked into the kitchen and reached for my phone with numb fingers. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. Brandon. I stared at Brandon's name for several seconds before pressing play. Rain hammered the roof above me so hard it nearly drowned out the beginning of the message. Then his voice came through smooth and controlled, the same way wealthy men speak when they believe they already own the outcome. Mrs. Carter, he began calmly, I think everyone would benefit if we handled this rationally. Not Evelyn. Not Mom. Mrs. Carter. Cold. Formal. Deliberate. I leaned against the kitchen counter while lightning flashed across the dark windows. We understand this property carries sentimental value, he continued, but at the end of the day, the ranch is still an asset. And assets need proper management. Asset. The word scraped against my skin. Not home. Not Harold's life work. Not the land where my daughter learned to walk barefoot through bluebonnets. Just an asset. His voice never wavered. There are investors expecting movement on the acquisition process. Delays create complications for everyone involved. Acquisition. Like they were discussing a hotel merger instead of the place where my husband's ashes rested beneath the oak trees. Then came the sentence that finally made my stomach turn. If cooperation becomes difficult, we will pursue other options. Other options. Legal language dressed as politeness. Threats hidden beneath professionalism. I slowly lowered myself into one of the kitchen chairs because suddenly my legs didn't feel steady anymore. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. They no longer saw me as family. I had become paperwork standing in the way of a transaction. When people begin calling your home an opportunity, they've already stopped seeing you as human. The voicemail ended, but the silence afterward felt even worse. Then my phone buzzed again. Madison. I almost ignored it. Almost. But some broken part of me still hoped my daughter would sound like herself again. I answered quietly. Mom, finally. Her voice carried frustration now. Exhaustion. Not fear. Did Brandon leave you a message? Yes. Good. Because this situation is getting completely out of control. Out of control. As though I were the dangerous one. Rainwater slid down the windows behind me while I gripped the phone tighter. Madison, I said slowly, why are you letting him speak to me like this? A long pause followed. Then she answered with something that hollowed me out completely. Because Dad wanted me to have the land eventually. I shut my eyes instantly. No, I whispered. Your father wanted this ranch protected. That's not true. Her response came too fast. Too practiced. He told me himself when I was younger. He said one day all of this would become mine. The kitchen suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. She was rewriting Harold now. Rewriting memories. Twisting dead words into weapons. You're remembering what you wanted to hear, I said carefully. No, Mom. You're the one refusing to let go. The cruelty in that sentence wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. It sounded reasonable. Measured. Almost compassionate. And somehow that hurt deeper than screaming ever could. Because she was using love itself to corner me. Using Harold. Using family. Using every sacrifice I had ever made as leverage to force surrender. There is no betrayal more painful than watching someone use your love against you, and call it justification. After the call ended, I stayed sitting in that dark kitchen long after the storm had moved farther across the fields. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, but the violence had passed outside. Inside me, it hadn't. I stared at Harold's empty chair across the table until my vision blurred. For a moment, exhaustion almost won. Not physical exhaustion. Something heavier. The kind that makes people surrender simply because fighting hurts too much. Maybe Madison was right. Maybe I was old. Maybe protecting the ranch alone no longer made sense. Maybe giving them what they wanted would finally end this constant pressure pressing against my chest. I actually considered it. That was the terrifying part. Then lightning flashed faintly beyond the pasture, illuminating the old barn through the kitchen window for half a second. And suddenly I remembered a night from years earlier. Harold standing beside that same window after a drought nearly destroyed us financially. Bills stacked across the table. Bank threatening foreclosure. Me crying quietly because I thought we were about to lose everything. He had placed both hands on the counter, looked out toward the land, and said something I never forgot. Protect the land, Eve. Not sell it. Not leverage it. Protect it. At the time, I thought he meant financially. Now I understood he meant something much bigger. Because land remembers people. The fences Harold built. The trees Madison climbed as a child. The graves. The memories. The years no one else saw. All of it lived here. And suddenly the truth became brutally clear. If I surrendered this ranch, I wouldn't only lose property. I would lose the last place in the world where my life with Harold still existed untouched. My breathing slowly steadied. The fear remained. So did the grief. But underneath both, something harder began taking shape. Resolve. Madison thought I was emotional. Brandon thought I was weak. Both of them had mistaken kindness for surrender. I stood up slowly and walked toward the back door. The storm clouds were breaking apart now, revealing strips of pale moonlight across the pasture. Wind moved softly through the grass Harold once taught Madison to ride horses across. "I'm still here," I whispered into the darkness. And for the first time since the wedding, I stopped feeling ashamed. Angry people can be manipulated. Guilty people can be pressured. But once a person decides they have nothing left to lose, they become dangerous. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office. Daniel Brooks' office sat on the second floor of an old brick building in downtown Austin, far from the polished glass towers where men like Brandon liked doing business. No marble lobby. No luxury decor. Just quiet hallways, old bookshelves, and the smell of paper that had survived decades. For some reason, that made me trust him immediately. Rainwater still clung to my coat when his assistant led me inside. Daniel stood as I entered, tall, silver-haired, glasses low on his nose. He looked more like a history professor than a lawyer. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, offering his hand. "Please sit." The kindness in his voice nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was normal. And after the last few days, normal kindness felt unfamiliar. I sat across from him gripping my purse tightly while he waited without rushing me. No interruptions. No fake sympathy. Just patience. So I told him everything. The wedding. The humiliation. The retirement community. The pressure. The threats. The cut fence. At one point, my voice cracked when I described Madison asking me to leave the ballroom. Daniel didn't react immediately. He simply folded his hands together and asked quietly, "Has your daughter always been financially dependent on you?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered slowly. "Not directly. But emotionally?" I looked down at my hands. That silence became its own answer. Daniel nodded once, like he had seen this pattern before. Then he opened a folder on his desk and slid several printed documents toward me. "Mrs. Carter, before you came in today, I made a few calls." A cold feeling moved through my chest. He tapped one of the pages carefully. "Brandon Mercer's uncle is currently under financial investigation connected to 2 failed development projects." I frowned immediately. "What does that have to do with my ranch?" "Everything." Daniel leaned back slightly. "The investors Brandon mentioned?" He paused. "Most of them are already nervous. They need new land fast or the entire investment structure collapses." Suddenly all the pressure made sense. The rushed conversations. The legal threats. The sudden urgency. This was never about helping me retire. They were trying to save themselves. Daniel continued calmly. "If they secure your ranch, they can restructure the deal, attract new capital, and stabilize the project before the investigation spreads publicly." I stared at him in disbelief. So Brandon already promised them my property? Most likely. The room felt very still after that. Outside the office window, traffic moved through wet Austin streets while my entire understanding of the situation rearranged itself piece by piece. Madison wasn't just manipulated. She was trapped inside something much larger than she understood. And Brandon? He wasn't patient because he was confident. He was patient because he was desperate. The most dangerous people are not always greedy. Sometimes, they're terrified. Daniel removed his glasses slowly. Mrs. Carter, I need you to understand something very clearly. His voice lowered. People under financial pressure make reckless decisions when they believe survival depends on one asset. One asset. My home. My husband's land. My life. Then Daniel reached toward the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out an old weathered file tied together with faded blue ribbon. Dust clung lightly to the corners. He placed it carefully in front of me. And suddenly, my heartbeat changed. I looked down at the file while Daniel carefully untied the faded blue ribbon holding it together. The paper inside had yellowed with age. Dust clung lightly to the edges like the folder had been sleeping untouched for years. Then I saw the name at the top. Harold Carter. My breath caught instantly. Daniel opened the first page slowly and turned it toward me. Do you recognize this? At first, I only stared at the signature near the bottom. Then my stomach tightened. It was mine. 10 years earlier. I leaned forward in disbelief. What is this? A preliminary conservation trust draft, Daniel answered quietly. Your husband began preparing it before his diagnosis became terminal. The room suddenly felt smaller. Harold never told me. Or maybe he tried and I wasn't ready to hear it back then. My fingers moved across the old paper carefully, tracing faded ink and handwritten notes in Harold's familiar slanted handwriting. Protect ranch integrity. Prevent forced sale. Preserve land permanently. Every sentence felt like a voice reaching across time. I remembered that winter suddenly. Harold sitting at the kitchen table late at night surrounded by paperwork while pretending it was just tax planning. I never questioned it deeply because cancer had already consumed too much of our lives by then. But now the truth sat directly in front of me. He had been preparing for this long before any of us realized why. A strange feeling moved through me. Not fear. Not grief. Something almost spiritual. As if Harold had left pieces of himself hidden along the path ahead because he knew one day I would need them. Daniel watched me carefully before speaking again. Your husband was worried about outside influence around the property after he passed. I looked up sharply. Outside influence? He nodded slowly. He specifically mentioned concerns about Madison being emotionally vulnerable to manipulation. The words hit me harder than expected. Not because I disagreed. Because Harold saw it before I did. Daniel opened another section of the file. There were discussions about adding legal safeguards. He paused briefly. Power of attorney limitations. Restrictions on forced transfers. Permanent conservation clauses. I closed my eyes for a second. Harold knew. Maybe not about Brandon specifically. But about the kind of people who appear when grief weakens a family and valuable land becomes visible. Sometimes, the dead see the truth long before the living are willing to accept it. He loved Madison, I whispered. I know, Daniel replied gently. That's exactly why he tried to protect her from future pressure. Protect her. Not obey her. Not surrender everything to her. Protect her. For the first time since this nightmare began, something inside me shifted away from panic. Because suddenly I understood something Brandon never considered. Harold had already moved his pieces long before Brandon entered the game. Daniel let the silence settle between us after that. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when truth finally stops hiding. He slid one final document across the desk slowly. "This is the updated conservation trust," he said. "If you sign it, the ranch can never be sold for private development. Not by investors. Not by future family pressure. Not after your death either." I stared at the paper. Permanent. The words sat there quietly, heavier than anything else in the room. For a moment, I imagined Madison's reaction. Brandon's. The investors. All those conversations happening behind closed doors while they waited for me to become weak enough to surrender. And suddenly I saw everything clearly. The wedding humiliation. The pressure. The threats. The truck near the fence. None of it happened because they loved me. It happened because they thought time was on their side. They thought they were waiting for me to die. What they didn't realize was that I had just been given the power to erase their entire future. Daniel placed the pen beside my hand carefully. No speeches. No pressure. Just choice. My fingers wrapped around the pen automatically. And this time, they didn't shake. A strange calm spread through me as I signed my name across the final page. Evelyn Carter. The ink looked darker than before somehow. Sharper. Final. Daniel watched quietly while I finished the last signature and closed the folder. "That's it," he said softly. No dramatic music. No explosion. Just a single sentence ending generations of entitlement in less than 10 seconds. I leaned back slowly in the chair, exhaling for what felt like the first full breath I'd taken in days. The fear was still there. But now it belonged to them. Outside the office window, sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds over Austin. And right at that exact moment, my phone started ringing. Madison. I stared at Madison's name glowing across my phone screen while Daniel quietly gathered the signed documents into the folder. For a second, I considered ignoring the call. Then I answered. "Mom?" Her voice sounded completely different now. Not controlled. Not impatient. Shaking. Behind her, I heard muffled arguing. A door slammed somewhere nearby. Then Brandon's voice burst through faintly in the background before disappearing again. "Madison," I said carefully. "What happened?" She inhaled unevenly like she'd been crying for a long time. "The investors pulled out." I said nothing. Rain still slid softly down the office windows, but outside the storm was finally beginning to fade. Sunlight pushed weakly through the clouds over downtown Austin while silence settled heavily inside Daniel's office. Madison kept talking too fast. Brandon's uncle got flagged in the investigation this morning. Someone leaked documents online. The investors are freezing everything until they know what's happening. Everything. I looked down at the signed conservation trust resting calmly on Daniel's desk. Gone. Every future they built around my land had just collapsed in less than an hour. "He's freaking out," Madison whispered. "Mom, I think something's really wrong." For the first time since the wedding, I heard fear in my daughter's voice. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not frustration. Fear. Then suddenly Brandon shouted something loud enough for me to hear clearly through the phone. "You told me she'd sign." The room inside me went completely still. Madison began crying harder immediately afterward. "I didn't know," she kept repeating. "I swear to God, I didn't know." I closed my eyes slowly. And finally, the truth arrived. Not gently. Not all at once. In pieces sharp enough to cut through every illusion I still carried about my daughter's marriage. "Mom," Madison's breathing broke unevenly. I found emails on Brandon's laptop. Something cold moved through my chest. "What kind of emails?" She hesitated. Long enough for me to already understand. Then she whispered, "He was planning to leave after the deal closed." I felt Daniel glance toward me from across the desk, but neither of us spoke. Madison's voice collapsed completely after that. There were messages with his uncle, talking about waiting until the property transferred first. She choked on the next sentence. He said divorcing me afterward would be easier financially. The words hung there like smoke after a fire. And suddenly every moment replayed differently in my mind. The rushed wedding. The pressure. The fake urgency. Brandon wasn't building a future with Madison. He was positioning himself beside an inheritance. There are people who don't betray you with knives. They simply wait until they get what they want, then disappear. On the other end of the line, my daughter was breaking apart in real time. And somewhere beneath the grief, a terrible part of me realized something else. This was the first time Madison truly understood how it felt to be used. Madison kept crying on the other end of the phone, but the sound no longer pulled at me the way it used to. For years, one tear from her could undo my anger. One apology could make me forget my own pain. Not anymore. "Mom, please say something." I looked out the office window while traffic moved slowly through the wet Austin streets below. Somewhere in the distance, sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds completely, washing the city in pale gold. The timing felt almost cruel. Or perfect. "I loved you enough to survive things that should have broken me," I said quietly. Madison sobbed harder. I know, and I'm sorry, no." I stopped her gently. "You're sorry because he betrayed you." Silence. Sharp. Immediate. Because we both knew it was true. If Brandon had stayed loyal, if the investors had stayed, if the ranch had transferred successfully, this phone call never would have happened. My chest tightened once. Not from rage anymore. From clarity. "You threw me out of your wedding," I continued softly. "Then you tried to remove me from my own life. Mom, please, you called me unstable." My voice remained calm. Difficult. Emotional. "I didn't mean it." "But you said it." Another silence. This one heavier. Across the desk, Daniel lowered his eyes respectfully, giving me privacy without leaving the room. And suddenly I understood something terrifying about grief. Sometimes people don't mourn the person they hurt. They mourn losing access to them. Madison lost everything in less than 24 hours. The husband she defended. The money she imagined. The future she built in her mind. The ranch. And finally, me. Her breathing cracked through the phone again. "Mom, please don't leave me alone with this." I closed my eyes. For one painful second, I almost answered like the old version of myself. The woman who absorbed every wound just to keep her daughter comfortable. But that woman had been disappearing long before the wedding. I opened my eyes slowly and looked down at the signed trust resting safely inside Daniel's folder. Then I gave my daughter the only thing I still had left to give her. The truth. Goodbye, Madison. And before she could answer, I ended the call. 6 months later, the ranch sounded alive again. Not with arguments. Not with lawyers. With children. I walked slowly across the pasture just after sunrise while soft morning light spilled over the fields in long golden streaks. Wildflowers had started blooming again near the southern fence line. Birds moved through the oak trees overhead, and somewhere behind me, a group of elementary school kids burst into laughter after spotting a turtle near the creek. The sound caught me off guard the first few times. I had forgotten land could heal too. After the Conservation Trust became permanent, part of the ranch was converted into a protected environmental learning space for local schools. Small groups visited every week now. They learned about native plants, wildlife, soil restoration, and the history of Texas ranch land. Harold would have loved it. I stopped near the old windmill and watched 2 little girls kneeling in the grass studying wildflowers with absolute seriousness while their teacher smiled nearby. For the first time in a long while, the ranch no longer felt like something under attack. It felt safe. Land is a lot like people. When protected the right way, it begins breathing again. A warm breeze moved across the pasture, carrying the smell of cedar and sunlit grass. I closed my eyes for a second and simply listened. No vibrating phone. No threats. No pressure. Just peace. The kind that arrives quietly after surviving something that almost destroyed you. Later that afternoon, I found the letter waiting inside the mailbox near the front gate. Handwritten. Madison. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it at the kitchen table. The handwriting looked shaky. Inside, there were no excuses this time. No investors. No Brandon. No blame shifting. Just apology after apology written across 6 pages stained by what looked like tears. I became someone Dad would have hated. That sentence stayed with me longest. Madison wrote about the divorce. About therapy. About waking up every morning replaying the wedding in her mind. She admitted she spent so much time trying to become part of Brandon's world that she slowly started treating her own mother like an obstacle standing outside it. Near the end of the letter, one line nearly broke me. I think I stopped seeing your pain because I was too busy chasing the life I wanted. I folded the pages carefully after finishing. Then I sat there quietly while late afternoon sunlight moved across the kitchen floor. Part of me wanted to call her immediately. Part of me still remembered the hallway outside that ballroom. The relief on her face when I agreed to disappear. Healing is strange like that. Forgiveness and memory often live inside the same room together. In the end, I placed the letter inside the old wooden drawer beside Harold's watch and closed it gently. Not because I hated her. And not because the pain was gone. But because some wounds stop bleeding long before they fully disappear. That night, I stayed on the porch long after sunset with Harold's old blanket across my lap and the sound of crickets filling the dark fields around the ranch. The world felt quieter now. Not perfect. Just honest. For a long time, I used to believe love meant endurance. You forgive. You sacrifice. You absorb pain quietly because that's what mothers do. At least that's what I told myself every time Madison crossed a boundary I should have stopped earlier. every time I made excuses for disrespect because I was afraid confrontation would damage our relationship. But sitting there beneath the Texas night sky, I finally understood something age teaches too late to too many people. Enduring everything is not the same thing as loving someone well. Sometimes constant endurance becomes self-destruction wearing the disguise of kindness. I thought about all the parents who slowly disappear inside their children's demands. The mothers called difficult the moment they say no. The fathers pressured into surrendering pieces of themselves just to keep peace inside the family. How many parents are being manipulated right now, while still calling it love? Wind moved softly through the grass beyond the porch steps. Somewhere far across the pasture, the old windmill creaked gently in the dark. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt guilty for protecting myself. Not angry. Not bitter. Free. Because boundaries are not cruelty. Sometimes they are the final act of survival. I looked out across the ranch one last time before going inside. The fences. The trees. The land Harold trusted me to protect. And suddenly I understood the real meaning of legacy. Legacy is not what people leave behind after death. It is what they refuse to let others destroy while they are still alive. Some people only love you for as long as you continue sacrificing yourself for them. The moment you protect your peace, the moment you say no, the moment you stop giving them access to your time, your money, your energy, your life, their love changes shape. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes brutally. And maybe the hardest part isn't losing strangers. Maybe it's realizing the people trying to take everything from you are the same people you once would have destroyed yourself to protect. So what happens when the person demanding your silence, your guilt, your surrender, is your own child? What happens when love becomes manipulation dressed as family obligation? That question destroys more parents than most people will ever admit out loud. If someone in your family has ever treated your kindness like an endless resource, if you've ever been made to feel selfish for protecting yourself, or if you've ever watched love slowly turn into control, tell me your story in the comments. Because more people are living through this pain silently than anyone realizes. And if stories about family betrayal, emotional manipulation, painful awakenings, and justice that arrives almost too late speak to something inside you, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the people who hurt us the deepest are the ones who once called us family.